Thank you all so much for having me here with you today. This is a topic that's near and dear to my heart, and it's fun to get to talk about it. I don't often get to do book reports, so this is kind of fun. So the way this presentation is going to work is I'm going to walk through a little bit about NEMOURS, and then we're going to talk a little bit about Leopold and who he was, and then a little bit about Sand County Almanac, and some of the key pieces and how those dovetail with what we're trying to do at NEMOURS. All right. So I always begin all of my presentations, especially when we're talking about NEMOURS, with acknowledging the reason why we exist. And this is the DuPont family. Eugene DuPont III established NEMOURS Wildlife Foundation in 1995. And when you look at the landscape around the Low Country, one of the things, I have a laser here, that sort of stands out to you is you've got Charleston and Savannah, and you see the big green patch there in the middle. And that big green patch is the Ace Basin, which is a landscape that's one of the most important in the United States. Around 330,000 acres is protected now within the Ace Basin, that big green spot. And again, one of the last great places on Earth, according to the Nature Conservancy. And within the Ace Basin, you will find the NEMOURS Wildlife Foundation. And as we zoom in a little bit closer to get oriented, by the way, just a show of hands, who's been to NEMOURS from the audience? Wow, this is a well-seasoned crew. That's good to see. I won't spend too much time on this then, since most of you have been there, which is great to see. Whoops. Did I do that or did I lose my... Well, I can continue. So, as we were looking at NEMOURS and where it was on the map, you notice that Highway 21 runs from Beaufort. We actually come out and touch 21, and we're almost equidistant from Savannah and from Charleston. And so what we do at NEMOURS is conservation research, conservation education, and land stewardship. And I'll get a little bit ahead on my slides here, but if you think about those, we often talk about them as if they're pillars, and I hate the term pillars. You'll see when we get the picture back up. I think of these more as overlapping Venn diagram circles. If you visualize them together, our research informs our land stewardship. Our education occurs on the land. The land is a lab for our research. All of these things really turn each other. They don't operate independently. Any luck with the slides? Okay. It's funny, one of the first time I ever gave a scientific presentation when I was doing my master's degree, this will date me a little bit, but this was back when the slide carousel days. And I was mortified to stand up on stage in front of a big audience. I was doing my master's on quail, and the guy who was the director of quail in Texas, basically, was sitting right in the front row, and I was just terrified. I got up there, and I hit the first slide, and two of them slid into the deck together and stuck. And they could not get them unpried from the deck. And so I had to give the whole thing with no slides. And again, my hero sitting there in the front row, and I was sure I'd ruined it, and I walked off stage, and he slapped me on the back and said, "That was a heck of a job, young man," and I was just proud as a peacock. I'm not sure I can do that today, though, because there's a bunch of slides here, so hopefully we can get these back up and running here momentarily. Let's see, a little bit more about Mr. Leopold. So Aldo Leopold was really the most important person in wildlife conservation. He was the founding father of the field. He was born in 1889, I believe it was, 87, I sometimes mix that one up, but born in the late 1800s and died in 1948. And so while he was alive, he worked for a while. He went to the Yale Forestry School. At the time, there wasn't a field of wildlife science, so the only place that you could get close to wildlife was through forestry. So he went to the Yale Forestry School. Oh, we're back up here. I'll click ahead to where I was. A little bit more about NEMOURS. Take a step back and we'll get back to Mr. Leopold here in just a moment. So this is an outline of NEMOURS, and as I mentioned it, you can see the Cumbia River Bridge is right there. So if you aren't not familiar with this, if you're driving towards Charleston, the big bridge you hit after Gardens Corner, we're kind of on both sides of the road from there. It's an amazing property. It sounds like many of you have been there, which is encouraging to hear, but we have some gorgeous pine savannas, pine upland areas, hardwood bottoms, some of my favorite areas that are near and dear to my heart. In Alabama, we had similar habitats that were part of what inspired me to become a conservationist. Some old fields that we're actually doing some interesting work in right now. And of course, what we're known for first and foremost is our wetlands, our managed tidal impoundments, which are also historic rice fields. And I'll touch on these a little bit as we go through and sort of how they relate to Leopold. This is my diagram. Since I just talked about it, I'll flip through it real quickly. But I did want to point out one thing in the middle there that I didn't mention as far as the pillars, and that's the concept of leadership. And that's something that we're working hard to develop as well. We're trying to build an entire arc that will take people from their young lives all the way up through their careers and help them develop into conservation leaders. And that's why I always put that in the center, because that's really one of the outcomes we hope to generate. Okay, so back to Mr. Leopold. So, as I was saying, he went to Yale, went to forestry school in Yale, and then he went out west as a forester. Spent a lot of time in Arizona. And then he came back and became a professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And he was the first professor of wildlife science. So when we say the founding father, he was literally the founding father of wildlife science. He bought a piece of property while he was there, and on that piece of property in the sand counties of Wisconsin is where he wrote a Sand County Almanac. And so this was a little old, rundown piece of property that I think he intentionally picked because it was beat up. And he took his family there, and he would get up at 3:30 in the morning, go out, listen to the birds, and sketch and write in his notebooks. And that's what the book became, was these sketches here and there as part of the series there. So he wrote a lot, but two books that he's most known for. The one on the left is called Game Management, and this was written in 1933 and was the first sort of scientific textbook about managing wildlife. And then the second is the one that we'll be talking about a little bit more today, which is called a Sand County Almanac. And this is a collection of essays, as if you've got a chance to read beforehand. This collection of essays, he goes through month by month and essentially has parables for points he's trying to make about different animals, different ecological processes. Beautifully written. He's a spectacular writer, which is quite rare in our field. So if you just enjoy good prose, he's pleasurable to read, which is not something you can say about a lot of conservation biology books. But the main thing that sort of stemmed from a Sand County Almanac, which was published posthumously after he died in 1948, was this concept of a land ethic. And so when we're thinking about Leopold and thinking about the sort of timeline that informed who he became and his thinking, there was a period in North America we consider to be the age of exploitation, which was essentially from the time the first settlers arrived up through the early 1900s. And this was when the idea that the United States was this limited, North America was a unlimited bounty that could just be harvested to no end. And during that time, we realized that wasn't true, especially as Leopold was coming into his own. He was born about the same time that the last herds of bison were removed from the landscape. He was alive while there were still passenger pigeons. The last passenger pigeon, Martha, died in 1913, so he certainly saw some of that and was around people that saw them when they were in their full glory. There were still mountain lions, cougars in the eastern United States at that time. It was a very different place. The longleaf pine ecosystems were still largely intact in the late 1800s and were starting to be chipped away at, but were essentially gone by the time he was writing a lot of these books. So he was part of that transition from that age of exploitation to the age of ecology and conservation. And that's what makes, I think, his writing so special, is he really marks, I think, in a lot of ways, that transition in thinking. And we'll talk more about that as we go through some of his thoughts. So what I'll do with the rest of this is I'm going to go through some of the central concepts that were part of Sand County Almanac, and particularly about this land ethic. And then I will juxtapose them with what we do at NEMOURS and how these two overlap, how that's informed our thinking. You'll see that it's not one-to-one. We aren't, matching what he did piece by piece, but you can see how the two intersect. When I first got to NEMOURS, I've been there for 4 years now, we did a big strategic planning exercise, something I really enjoy, strategic planning. So I forced all my staff, my board, everybody to sit down and work through all these exercises with me. And part of that yielded a series of we believe statements. And so the we believe statements, I feel like, were the best way to kind of line up with these. So we'll go from his concepts to our we believe statements, and then some of the things that we're actually doing on the ground in response to that. So the first concept I wanted to talk about was the idea of land as a community. Land up until this point was largely considered to be land, literally physical tracts of dirt. And so part of what was starting to come online, again, he was a piece of this, there were others that had similar thinking, but he was one of the spokesmen for this concept, was the idea of a biotic community, that it was the whole ecosystem that functioned. It was not just an isolated parcel of land. And the whole concept of ecology, that everything works together in synchrony. And key to this, that we are citizens within that system. We are not external observers. We're not divorced from it. We are part of that whole ecosystem. And so I put at the bottom there the do unto thy neighbor, because if we're part of that system, then we are interacting with it as if we're neighbors. The older concept, from going all the way back to Genesis, was the idea that we had dominion, that we were lording over these things and we were there to take from the ecosystem. This was a different concept. We're part of the ecosystem, they're our neighbors, we're there to interact with that ecosystem. So at NEMOURS, we believe that human well-being ultimately hinges on ecosystem well-being, and that people and nature are intrinsically connected. So you can see the kind of overlap with those two ideas. Again, we came up with this, of course this was informing our thinking, but somewhat independently. And one of the ways I like to think about this is through an illustration. This is diagrams, so I'm going to torture you guys with one strategic planning diagram. You see our happy young crabbers here, and the general concept that we're working around is that nature conservation produces what we call ecosystem services. So these are the things that functional, intact ecosystems provide to people. So all the little crabs that you see there are the result of these healthy ecosystems that we have built. This can be a variety of different things. Ecosystem services could be fish for people that fish for a living. If you're a birder, it's a chance to go out and experience birds. It could be birding income for people that run birding tours, or even a town like Beaufort and people that come here to experience nature. It can also be spiritual. It's good for your soul, and I think we would all agree that being out in nature is good for our souls. There's a lot of scientific research to support it, but I think you can just feel that as well. So those ecosystem services promote human well-being, and all the little smiling faces you see there I think is a pretty good illustration of human well-being. And part of what we're trying to create here, and this will, part of what I'll be discussing in the subsequent pieces of this, is what I've sort of coined as societal services. Being able to make that connection, that people can make the connection between their well-being, the ecosystem services, and nature conservation, should then encourage them to be supportive of nature conservation, to engage in that. And then this becomes the great virtuous loop and a feedback loop. And this is really at NEMOURS what we're trying to create. And I think, at its essence, this is a lot of what Leopold was talking about, is trying to create this type of a circle where these different elements all interact together. Ethics extends beyond humans and is not reserved for individuals and society, but morality extends to the natural world and ecosystems. So now this was also sort of a novel concept when Leopold wrote about it. The idea that ethics was really just for people. It was our interactions with each other that were guided by morals and by ethics. Our interactions with the environment really weren't. And one of the things he challenged us to do was to think about our interactions with the environment as being ethical, that the decisions we make we have a moral obligation to conserve ecosystems, to be good stewards of the environment, and that should be part of how we identify ourselves and how we relate to the world. So at NEMOURS, we believe that nature, and by extension humanity, faces an uncertain future with seemingly insurmountable threats on the horizon. So again, I think you can get some sense of this, that there's a moral piece to this, that these giant threats that we have in large part created are on the horizon. They're threatening nature, they're threatening the ecosystem on which we depend, that we're a part of, and we have a moral obligation to engage with that. Just an illustration of that, this is the biodiversity loss of vertebrates around the world. These threats are very real. These were things that he hadn't even documented at that time when he was writing these, but you can see the decline in vertebrate populations around the world are quite pronounced. We're fortunate that it's not as bad here as is in some other places, but still a trajectory we don't want to be on. You can have animals that are high profile, like quail. The disappearance of quail in the southeast has certainly gotten a lot of press. There's a lot of reasons for that. But Leopold, I think, would have challenged us to think beyond just the quail, just the sort of commodity animals, the high profile animals, and to think about things like that. Anybody know what that is? Just out of curiosity? Salamander, that's correct. Any more dialed in than salamander? What's that? Okay. So that is a siren. That we have a couple of species of giant salamanders here in the Low Country. This is what we call hidden biodiversity. So this is a little one that's as big as this person's hand. They get up to be about 3 feet long, as big around as your arm. And we have 2 species of giant salamanders here, and no one knows about them. We have people that have worked in these marshes and these wetlands for years and have never seen these things. But I think Leopold would charge us to consider these, as well as the quail, to consider the whole ecosystem. These are all important parts, and keeping all the pieces is important. We believe that in the face of these threats, providing hope through engagement, empowerment, and facilitating effective action are paramount. And this is getting a little bit ahead. This is kind of more, I think, of a modern thing. I don't know that this was necessarily at the forefront of Leopold's thinking on this, but I think this sense of optimism is quite important to us now, that we maintain that, because these giant threats that we have on the horizon, climate change, invasive species, pollution, all these macro things that seem just insurmountable, they can be addressed, and we have to have confidence and a sense of empowerment that we can address them. We can't be paralyzed by those things, but it's very important that we, again, facilitate effective actions, pick the right actions. We engage, we empower people. And at NEMOURS, this is one of the things we take a lot of pride in. This is an undergraduate class that's working with one of our partners, Tony Mills, at Spring Island Trust. We do a lot of work with Spring Island and with Tony. But this is the kind of thing that we're empowering young minds to go out and make a difference in the world. This is one of our graduate research fellows. This is a project we're very excited about, where we're funding the best and the brightest graduate researchers to come and do work out in NEMOURS. He's using drones to survey for secretive marsh birds and waterfowl. High-tech stuff. I don't know how to run any of these things, but I'm starting to get to that age where I hand these things to them and say, make them work. But anyway, he's a brilliant young man and doing some really important work. Again, empowerment and a sense of being able to take action despite what seem like long odds. And then, of course, near and dear to my heart, and you'll see this throughout the slide presentation, pictures, I enjoy working with children immensely and seeing that light turn on for them and having them have their first little experience as little scientists. This is part of our Coastal Kids program, which we do with Spring Island Trust. We'll be launching that again this summer. It's something that we offer free to the kids of the Low Country, very hands-on, very science-based, different than your typical nature camp. But anyway, these are some of the ways that we're trying to address that. And you can see the light bulbs turn on and our next little generation of conservationists coming up. All right, the integrity and stability standard. Now this one, I'm going to go ahead and put up the actual quote that is probably Leopold's most famous, or at least one of his most famous quotes. "A thing is right when it tends to preserve the integrity, stability, and beauty of a biotic community. It is wrong when it tends otherwise." It's very simple, which is what I like about it. It's obviously the gift of being able to write and to make a point clearly and cleanly with not too many words. But I think about this all the time as we're making management decisions on our property. I think of it almost like the Hippocratic Oath, that, first do no harm. The first question we ask, and everything that we've been doing since I've arrived, is, are we improving wildlife habitat? Are we improving the stability, the integrity of this system with every action that we take? If the answer is no, then we need to think of a different solution. This is a wonderful guiding principle. It's simple, it's easy to remember. It's one that you can apply in your own lives. And these are just some of the illustrations of some of the things that we do at NEMOURS that really are part of that. Things like prescribed fire. These are fire-adapted ecosystems. Longleaf pine require burning. We're improving the integrity and resilience of that system through that action. Even big things like floating track hose. This is one of the tools we use to maintain the dikes, which maintains one of the most important ecosystems in the entire low country. That's another of our graduate research fellows who is doing work on alligators and microplastics and forever chemicals and how they accumulate in alligators can ultimately get into people through that route. But again, I like that photo because it sort of shows the active management improving that ecosystem with the research that we're conducting. And then the classic rice trunks. These are obviously emblematic of the low country, literally on our logo at NEMOURS. But an ancient technology and a big part of what we do out there, again, improving that integrity of that system. Ecological conscious. Conservation goes beyond regulation and policy, and personal and societal ethics are far more powerful. So this one I often think about in terms of strategies and the conservation strategies that we apply to things. So when I used to work in strategic planning, we talked about what was different leverage points in a strategy that we were trying to employ. So you could have little tiny leverage points like an individual action by a single person, all the way up to the highest leverage point where you could have the most impact is where you don't have to have a regulatory structure. It's just something we do as a society. You don't have to tell people to do it. You don't have to threaten them. You don't have to incentivize them. They just feel it. And that's really what I think he's getting at here. And again, something that we are trying to generate is this high leverage community ethic, which is something we're very blessed with here in the low country. There is a stronger conservation ethic here than in most places, but something we want to build on to empower more people, to bring more people under that tent. And so with that, with NEMOURS, we believe that experiential, hands-on outdoor learning opportunities are increasingly rare, and through the beauty and wonder of NEMOURS, we have the unique ability to offer these rare experiences to students both young and old. And so this is, again, bringing people into that tent to start to instill that conservation ethic, that land ethic into folks at a young age, and hopefully get to the point where they just adopt that as part of who they are, part of their own personal morality, part of their community morality. I mean, I think one of the things that we see right now and some of the pushback against a lot of the environmental regulations is that those regulations, A, were not necessarily always effective, and B, how easy it is to repeal those things, that if it's not just part of the DNA of your culture, with a flip of a switch, you can lose those tools. So we want to make sure that people just have that as part of who they are and how they relate to the world and how they relate to each other. Show you more pictures of cute kids. I used to do work on bears, and bear cubs were always my little hook. I'd put up bear cubs, so now I've got cute kids. But this is part of our Coastal Kids program. Again, this is that first inspiration. This is forming community. These little cohorts of kids all end up forming little friendships, and they hang out together and go on their own little conservation adventures after the program. We're actually this year going to be doing an alumni day where we're going to start bringing some of these kids back to build forward with that. We do some work with high school kids, getting into the next generation. This is the WEP program, which is run through Clemson Extension, that we help support and train some of the teams. They write little wildlife management plans, and they go out and they have a big competition. We're actually hosting in South Carolina the competition this year. South Carolina team has won that pretty consistently, so we've had pretty good showing in that. But that extends all the way up. This is a lifetime learning event. One of the things we started a little over a year ago was our Discovery Series, where we have a monthly free program for adults to come out. Each one has a different theme. You get to see a presentation and then go out and see what we're talking about actually on the property. It's fun. Get to go on a wagon ride. We've got some of these coming up. If you're interested, I'll make a plug for these at the end. But also, just back to that sense of empowerment, we also bring groups out. They're pulling, and here this was a group that our education outreach coordinator led that was pulling up Japanese climbing fern. Again, something that we're doing to keep the integrity of that ecosystem. Climbing fern is a pretty nasty invasive. You can choke out our native plants, but again, form that sense of community, take action, empower. We believe experiencing wild places and immersion in the outdoors and interacting with the natural world enriches people's lives, and these experiences are crucial to human well-being. And I think this is kind of what I was talking about earlier, that I think it's just really fundamental to who we are as humans. And I think anyone that lives an outdoor life and has that sense of connection is going to have a better life. When we think about the metrics we use, we know that a lot of these kids, that 99% of them are not going to become little wildlife scientists, but we hope that they'll just have better lives if they're comfortable in the outdoors and have that sense of connection to something that's not a screen. It's increasingly rare. Again, the sense of peace. I mean, imagine watching that alligator. This was taken right out in the front door at NEMOURS, and you can almost feel that sense of peace and connection to something ancient like an alligator. The mist rising, these are things that are just good for your soul. We need more kids in trees. It's actually my son. I came out and I did not realize he had climbed this tree, and I had this split-second decision between my son's going to fall out of the tree and break his neck, but it's the greatest photograph of all time. His mother's going to kill me, but I snuck one in before I went and coaxed him down. But again, this is part of our Coastal Kids program here as well. We went to the beach at Hunting Island. They were generous enough to bring us out there, but really just life-changing experiences for a lot of these kids. Interdependence, ecosystem, and these are the themes within the land ethic. Interdependence, ecosystems are complex relationships, and they go far beyond what I think sometimes are thought of when we talk about an ecosystem. Predators, prey, plant, soil, water, weather, it all goes into this. It's essentially energy flow through a nutrient cycle. It's all of the different components that all fit together. And one of the things that he talked about, and this is, I think, pretty commonly understood, I think now, but was somewhat revolutionary in his thinking, is that there are ripple effects, back to this puzzle piece concept, you pull a piece out of that puzzle and it sends ripples through the whole system. One of my favorite authors wrote a book called Keeping All the Pieces, Whit Gibbons, if you're familiar with him. He was a mentor of mine as a child. He was a herpetologist at Savannah Riverside, actually a mentor of Tony Mills too. Anyway, he wrote a book called Keeping All the Pieces, and that's very much this concept that we don't know when we pull a piece out of that puzzle what the ripple effects are going to be, but there certainly will be ripple effects. So we want to keep those pieces, we want to keep those ecosystems as functional and intact as they could be. And again, this was revolutionary. It's fairly well accepted now, but when he was writing this, these were new thoughts. We believe that effective conservation action is underpinned by solid science that provides the evidence base for informed decision making. So this is one I'm going to harp on a little bit as I go through a little bit more on the science piece. Science is providing evidence. We're not necessarily providing, as scientists, trying to provide answers per se. We're trying to provide evidence to make informed decisions, to inform actions. I think sometimes that's confusing for folks that look at scientists and say, give me the answer. We don't give you the answer. We give you evidence so that you can make an informed decision. And these are some of our little scientists that are out there gathering evidence to make those informed decisions. The gentleman on the right actually just finished his PhD at Mississippi State, and he was looking at foraging ecology and bioenergetics for birds using our impoundments. He's actually now our new wildlife scientist. He just came on board after he finished his PhD. Something we try to do at NEMOURS a lot is to try to have multiple touch points. We love to see this arc of people that have been with us at one phase and then come back for another phase. We're trying to build more processes to promote that. This was from our MAPS bird banding station. This is again providing evidence at a huge scale. MAPS stands for Monitoring Avian Productivity and Survival. It's part of a whole continent-wide database where we band little songbirds. It feeds into this giant database, and we can track things like migratory patterns, reproductive rates, survival rates, species distribution. Again, being able to feed all of this into something that big allows us to make more informed decisions as a society, as regulators, as scientists, as managers. And these are some of our friends here at USCB looking at water quality that's coming out of one of our areas that I'll mention in just a moment, one of our other projects. But working with the local folks here as well. I have an intern every year from USCB. Had some wonderful interns there over the last several years. Long-term thinking. Nature's cycles play out over time, and stewards need to think accordingly and not for short-term gain. So again, this seems somewhat intuitive, I think, now, and is, I think, much more accepted now. But when this was written, again, this was at the very end of that age of mass exploitation, when everything was looked at in just terms of dollars. If we clear cut all the longleaf pine, how much can we make off of that? It doesn't matter what we leave behind at the end. And so what he was challenging us to think about here was to think about ecology in the scale that it works at, which is typically quite long. And we as managers have to think about that, as I mentioned earlier about the Hippocratic Oath concept, that a lot of the decisions we make, we're never going to see the results of. Personally, when we plant a longleaf pine, it takes 50 years for that to become a mature tree. I'm probably not going to see that tree become mature, but it doesn't mean we don't plant them. We need to think about things in this longer macro time scale for, I know it sounds trite, but for generations to come, and it's really true. So at NEMOURS, we believe that this is a special place with significant cultural history, and it's our obligation to respect the past and lead into the future as exemplary stewards of this historically and ecologically irreplaceable landscape. So one of the things that I think is really compelling about the Low Country and about NEMOURS is the intersection between cultural history and ecology and conservation. It is truly, I've been fortunate enough to work all over the country and over the course of my career, and it's truly unique here. These are historic rice fields. These were dug out by enslaved people and I could go on this for quite a while, but these have a remarkable historic arc and are now some of the most important conservation assets in the entire eastern seaboard. One of the women that stayed with us for several years was Dr. Etterfield's Black. She actually stayed at the house at NEMOURS, and she wrote Combie. If you haven't heard of Combie, it won the Pulitzer Prize for history, and it's all about the Combie River Raid and how all these rice fields came to be and the liberation of the enslaved from those rice fields. It's a remarkable book. We actually hosted a book launch for her. It was the first event we had at the DuPont Conservation Hall. But I think, again, it's one of the things that's really in your face when you're here working with these impoundments and these historic rice fields is that sense of time. And you need to think about that when you're thinking about conservation, when you're thinking about ecology. And that was, I think, very much the point that Leopold was trying to make. So that you can produce things like this. This one's a little bit, I should have had a just big, more impressive picture. But that's an Amphiuma, which is the other giant salamander species we have here. And one of our little aspiring naturalists looking at that. These are predatory, by the way, which is kind of will weird you out, the idea of a giant eel-shaped predatory salamander that eats crayfish. Apparently, if in captivity, I've never seen this, people feed them live mice, which must be quite a horror show to witness. But humility in the face of complexity. So this is a big one. This one's near and dear to my heart, and as you can probably tell a little bit with what I was saying about science earlier, that we're providing evidence. One of my criticisms of my colleagues in the scientific community is that they often come across a little bit too cocksure about what they're saying. That they don't necessarily, they get attached to their hypotheses or their favorite theories on how things are going to work. And sometimes they pitch them a little bit too hard and with a little bit too much of a degree of assuredness. which, when they don't pan out, is why I think you sometimes see this pushback, which we're seeing against science right now, between that sort of attitude and also that they've presented this as a fact, when in fact, it is just a body of evidence to support an idea. So ecosystems are remarkably complex. That's one of the things we often talk about in wildlife science is physics envy. We would love to have the ability to predict things like a chemist or a physicist can, but we have so many moving parts in an ecosystem that it's almost impossible to make accurate predictions of things. So we have to have a sense of humility about that. Again, we're providing the best evidence we can, we're building that evidence base, we're making the best decisions we can, but we don't have all the answers. We need to acknowledge we don't have all the answers, and there will be things that we're not going to anticipate that will unfold. We believe that conservation science can provide evidence base, but that conservation outcomes rely on people's actions in response to that evidence. So this is back to what I was saying a moment ago, that's what really matters. We're trying to provide information for people to make decisions. People's decisions and their actions are what actually affect conservation. So I think there's an overlap with that, with this sense of humility, that if we can present it that way, then people are more likely to join and be part of this community of conservation, not feel that they've been talked down to or misled, that we think we say we know more than we actually do. And so we have some wonderful educators that we work with and scientists. This is Dr. Mariah Whitehead. She's been on our board for a while and a good friend and wonderful educator. She definitely, if you've seen her speak, has that sense of humility. So we like to surround ourselves with people who are of like mind. And then the Conservation Hall. I mentioned earlier that the first event that we'd ever had at the Conservation Hall, we just had the ribbon cutting on that about 2 years ago. And its whole purpose is to bring people, like groups of folks like yourselves, and it sounds like many of you have been in the hall, to NEMOURS so that they can have an opportunity to learn, to get that evidence, to make their own decisions. This was a group of professionals. We don't always do things that are specifically for the public. This was for wildlife or waterfowl managers. We had 60 waterfowl managers. Actually, the day Helene hit, in a cruel irony. It shows you actually how flat-footed Helene caught us all, because that's how many, they were all in our hall instead of out getting ready for the storm. But we had scientists from all over the country, from Fish and Wildlife Service, all the way from upstate New York, that came and presented there. So that's something we try to do at NEMOURS, to really be a hub for that information, for that evidence, to make good informed decisions. Okay, so as we're getting towards the end here, I'm going to throw a quote in that actually isn't from our book today, but is one of my favorites of Leopold's. This is from Game Management. The central thesis of game management is this: game can be restored by the use of the same tools which have heretofore destroyed it: axe, plow, cow, fire, and gun. So again, think about the timing of this. When he was writing this in 1933, pretty much all of those things had been essentially abused from an ecological context. Forestry was not thought of in terms of trying to generate beautiful, mature, healthy forests. It was a revenue stream. Grazing was overgrazing. It was how many cows can you get on a piece of property. Fire was uncontrolled wildfires, the whole Smokey the Bear thing, that it wasn't prescribed fire, it was the other. So anyway, he I think in a lot of ways was way ahead of his time in realizing that all of these tools could be used for the benefit of ecology. And I would also throw Dyke in there. He was in Wisconsin, so he didn't have a whole lot of waterfront to work with, but Dyke should probably be added to that as well. And just as an illustration, as an illustration of that, one of the new projects we're very excited about is introducing grazers onto the landscape. If you've been to NEMOURS, we actually have an upcoming discovery series I will plug at the end that's about this. But we're bringing back native grazers. Cows are not native, but they're replacing what would have been native ungulates on the landscape. These are special cows. This is the use of cows as a means to restore the landscape. I've got a 45-minute talk on this that's all on just the theories, none of the even data yet. I'll go ahead and do that now. Has everybody got time? Okay. But anyway, this is some of the researchers we're working with. This is Dr. Lydia Halloran and one of her graduate students. They're looking at soil carbon and nutrient cycling within our eco-pasture, is what we're calling this project, our eco-pasture area. We're also looking at invertebrates, vegetative responses. songbirds, a whole variety of things. It's a really exciting project. Again, I can go on and on about it, and I will not. We believe the greatest contributions as a foundation lies in the people we inspire to care, the knowledge we give them to act, and the conservation leaders we help to develop and empower. And this is back to that leadership concept. That really is one of the things we want to see as an outcome from NEMOURS, is bringing that next generation of leaders. Who knows, one of those little kids in that photograph may write the book that someone is giving a presentation about 50 years from now. And we want to be a spark for those kids, or for those people, for adults, for grown-ups, for graduate students. But we really want to serve as that site, that inspiration. And I think most of us that got into conservation had some sort of an inspiration moment or place, and we want to be that place. We want to provide those moments. And so we do that in a variety of ways, from very big presentations down to smaller presentations. We work with Outdoor Dream Foundation, which takes kids that typically have severe, often terminal illnesses, hunting and fishing, allowing them to spend time outdoors. If you're interested in supporting this organization, they have a fundraiser Friday night in Ridgeland. Would definitely encourage you to look at them. It's a wonderful group. We're also working to diversify the face of conservation. That's been definitely, I think, a shortcoming of the conservation movement in general. We've been working with Dr. Adams at the Penn Center, and so we've been bringing kids from St. Helena into the Coastal Kids program, which has been exceedingly rewarding. You can just see the faces. I mean, I have more light bulb turning on moments from from the Penn Center kids than from anybody that we've had, and just really wonderful children, and so rewarding to see that. And then again, the next generation. This is a young wildlife scientist in his formative years. I actually had him pose for this picture. He was very proud to get his little action shot, but so that's a little bit staged, I'll have to admit. But he's tracking ducks, but we really do get some of the best and the brightest kids, and hopefully again provide that platform for them to take that next step in their careers and possibly end up writing that next book, Sand County Almanac, for the 2100s. And this is our whole team. There's 9 of us that do all of this work. It's a very small group of people, a very passionate group of people that I'm very, very fortunate to work with. And so with that, I just wanted to kind of bring it back full circle. Aldo Leopold was really the visionary and the greatest thinker, and I think, as I said, the father of wildlife conservation. And so much of what he wrote about still holds true today. I think we would all do well to go back and read that again. Some of these things have become, fortunately now, part of society, as I mentioned, part of societal values, I think, some. But it's certainly a time when I think it'd be good to revisit his writings as we see this increasing level of threats on the horizon and need things to give us optimism, and to look to the past and to the thinkers of the past and how they got through those pieces, give us hope for the future. And with that, I will wrap up. That is NEMOURS. That is Aldo Leopold and the Sand County Almanac. If you've never been to NEMOURS, I did want to briefly mention these are some of the events that we have lots of going on out there, and they're coming more and more. We're adding more and more things to our repertoire. These are all coming up here soon. Master Naturalist Group with Spring Island is going to be out on Wednesday. We have a really neat workshop on the timber doodle. There's actually a chapter in Sand County Almanac. The Skydance chapter is about timber doodles, also known as American woodcock. We've got a whole workshop on those guys. And then we've got the Discovery Series, as if you want to hear me do my long-form version of the cows and actually see them in action. That is there as well. Again, these are all free. Everything we try to do as much as we can. That's our goal, is to make this as accessible to everyone as possible. And if you're not on, it sounds like a lot of y'all are, but if you aren't on our mailing list, there's a QR code there that you can scan, which will keep you up to date on all the different things we have happening. Also, if you're not a QR code kind of person, these things confuse me sometimes too. I do have a hard copy sign up I'll just leave up here if you want to write your name and email address and keep up with what we're doing on your way out. But with that, I think I'm about right on time, hopefully close-ish. Any questions? Yes, ma'am.
I wanted to know if you at NEMOURS or the other wildlife management agencies are doing anything about this new data center?
We at NEMOURS, so we're.
Can you repeat the question?
Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry. Yes, thank you. So are we doing anything about the new data center, which is certainly these data centers have, I think, are obviously quite controversial. We are part of a group that promotes land conservation in the area, the Ace Basin Task Force. We aren't specifically at NEMOURS doing that, but we're part of a group that is generally in opposition to that particular data center. And again, trying to empower, back to the empowerment theme, some of the landowners that are join that to be able to hopefully fight the data center. But we don't have a particular stake in that directly at NEMOURS. Yes?
Over the last 10 to 15 years, there seems to be an increase in the number of roseated spoonbills.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any idea, is that accurate, and why it's increasing?
I think it is accurate. Why it's increased, I don't know the answer to exactly. I'm sorry, I got to repeat the question. Okay, so why are there more roseate spoonbills now than there were in the last 10 years or so? Why does it seem like there's been an increase in the population? Generally speaking, a lot of the water birds have done quite well. You know, the wood storks are in the process of being downlisted, which is really wonderful. Spoonbills, I think, are following a similar trajectory. They're recovering, you know, a lot of these, this is back to the thinking about things in long, which Leopold talked about in the longer arc of an ecology. It takes populations a long time to rebound when they've been beaten down as far as these were. So during the plume hunting era, which was again around the turn of the century, this was during when they were in the mass exploitation era, they would shoot birds off of nests, those were where they could find them, and anything that had a nice plume, so things like spoonbills, things like some of the egrets were almost wiped out. So it's taken time for them to rebuild, and I think that's part of what you're seeing. But we're doing better jobs of managing wildlife habitat, which is actually really encouraging as well. It's one of the reasons I get asked a lot about where the ducks are. You know, if you're a duck hunter, where are the big ducks? They don't come down anymore. Part of that is that the habitat north of us is better than it used to be. So a lot of them just don't make it because they don't need to. They've got better places to be further north that weren't there 50 years ago. So there's been a lot of advancements. We're making progress. It's not all is lost. I always want to emphasize that. So. Yes, others. Yes, sir.
I have a question related to the theme that Leopold thought that regulation shouldn't be the driving force for environmental stewardship.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen, over the past 50 years that the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act drove lots of improvements in the quality of our environment.
Mm-hmm.
And it's troubling to me to see this present administration roll back so much of the regulatory requirements
Mm-hmm.
on auto emissions, on greenhouse gas emissions, on pollution to waterways and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
What evidence do you have that without that regulation, we're going to be all right?
Ooh. So without regulation, what basically are we going to be okay is, I think, the crux of that. That's a challenging question. I mean, those regulations were hugely important. We have not reached a point, I think, that we would like to be where it is truly a societal value. And that's obviously a very complicated question as well, because, pieces of why we haven't reached that point, go outside of the conservation realm and into economics and other things. I don't know that I can say that we're going to be, okay without those things. My hope is that will be corrected at some point in the not too distant future. But it certainly, it's disheartening, I'll say, as a conservationist, to have seen all of that and seen the steps back we've taken, and without, again, the backstop of having society having taken over that next level beyond regulation.
Just to follow up, a lot of federal funding goes to organizations like yours
Mm-hmm.
Are you being hurt by withdrawal of federal funding for the programs?
It's certainly a lot of our colleagues. We haven't been directly affected. Well, I say we haven't. We had a couple of grants we applied for this year that didn't get funded that I think we would have had a good chance of getting funded. I can't say that for sure. You know, it was a grant application. We might not have gotten it anyway, but those programs were largely defunded. NSF, National Science Foundation, National Fish and Wildlife Foundation lost funding as well. So that's certainly impactful. I'm sorry I didn't repeat the question. Question was, have we been affected by the federal drawdown in grant money for research in general, but conservation in particular? And I would say not tremendously, but I don't know, because I wrote 2 fairly large grants that didn't get funded, and I don't know why, but I would suspect the money wasn't there, even if they had been good proposals. Yes? Mm-hmm.
When I saw that slide, I instantly thought of the kids that I work with and volunteer at the Whale Branch Middle School,
Mm-hmm.
Heritage Community Garden,
Yeah.
and a very poor part of our
Right,
county.
right.
So I'm happy to see the kids from St. Helena.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if there is an opportunity to grow that program to include kids from Whale Branch and other really poor districts.
Absolutely, and one of the things that's a challenge for us, and I'm sorry, yes, I'm sorry, I keep forgetting to do that. Thank you. Yeah. So the question was, could we expand to reach kids in other communities, other underserved communities beyond St. Helena, which is definitely something we want to do. What we're limited by, and this is always, money limits things, and while we're fortunate, we have an endowment that we work from, which is very fortunate, and we raise money, and there are donors I know in the room here today, but we are bottlenecked in how much we can do and how many classes we can handle, just by staffing. You saw our whole staff, facilities. We want to expand all of those things. In fact, we're going to be doing a fundraising campaign around education here real soon, actually starting this weekend. So we will be trying to increase that capacity, but certainly, and definitely if you're not, reach out to our education outreach coordinator. One of the things we can't do is bring big bus loads of kids. We just don't have the infrastructure for that. So we have to kind of operate at a smaller scale, which I think is more impactful anyway. But we really can't bring the entire 3rd grade from, the Beaufort School District. We just can't get that many kids out there. Yes, ma'am.
I hadn't even thought about it until the person asked that question. My husband and I did the Master Naturalist class, and I give a huge plug to that program because it's wonderful. And that's one of the first times I came out to NEMOURS.
Mm-hmm.
And they foolishly gave me one of those torches to do part of a controlled burn.
Oh, yeah.
But is there any possibility that there could be a partnership with funding somehow
Mm-hmm.
between the Master Naturalist staff,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
all those folks out there, and your program to bring kids out?
I think that's an excellent suggestion. That's something we haven't done a lot with. I'm sorry. Yes, so the question was, let's see if I can summarize. Are there opportunities to work with Spring Island and with the Master Naturalist organization to fundraise, potentially it sounds like volunteer, things of that nature? I think there absolutely are. We haven't built a big volunteer program yet. I'd like to, that's on our to-do list, to get more volunteer engagement and have more opportunities for volunteers to engage. That's a win-win, I think, for everybody. Again, something we're aspiring towards. I think from a fundraising perspective, that has a lot of potential because obviously the people that go through Master Naturalists care about that, and we're doing the same. It's the same people. Tony and I actually, when we were kind of building the Coastal Kids program, Master Naturalist was part of the concepts we used to build it. So
Well, I'm thinking even particularly focused on the underserved kids
Mm-hmm.
that you want to bring along to be conscious of all of that as they grow.
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. I think it's a wonderful suggestion. I'd love to explore more of that. That would be wonderful. Yeah. Yes. Yep. Yeah. Go ahead.
Do you take part or educate people in the areas like when the proposal to sell Chelsea Plantation
Mm-hmm.
and that area that could really affect the Ace Basin
Mhm.
with the building or the ideas that they were going to build? Do you guys help educate the surrounding area or even people buying it or opposing it or get involved in any educational ways with that?
Yeah, so the question is, and related to kind of land conservation and the development around here and how we intersect with that. We don't, we're not a land conservation organization like Open Land Trust or Low Country Land Trust. We work with them a lot, though. They're all good friends of ours, and we share resources. We're part of the task force. The Ace Basin Task Force is composed of all of these organizations, but NEMOURS specifically, that's a little outside of our sphere, that land conservation piece. Yes, sir.
I'll try to ask my question loudly.
Yeah. Thank you.
I'm kind of a history buff, but I don't know the backstory behind what brought DuPont to this area. I didn't know there was a connection between DuPont and the East Basin. And also, what's the tie into Spring Island? I've been there a couple of times, but I didn't know what the whole connection is between the three.
So so I guess that's a two-part question. How the DuPont family came to be here, and also how we work with Spring Island. The DuPont family. So in the era after the rice production ended, this is part of my longer story about all this and the kind of neat juxtaposition of cultural history and conservation. Really a who's who of the major industrialist families came down to this part of the world and bought up these plantations to use as duck hunting clubs primarily. But it was all of them, Guggenheims, DuPonts, you name it. It was a who's who of and it was because it was an overnight train ride from New York. You could get down here overnight, hunt, and go back. What that did, though, and part of the neat part of the intersection of this, is it kept the landscape intact in big chunks. So back to our question about land conservation, part of why we've been so successful in the ACE in conserving land is because we can do it in big parcels. It hasn't been all subdivided like a lot of other parts of the world. So that is an element of it. And then the whole story of how ducks and rice and all that. There's a wonderful book called Rice and Ducks, if you've never read it, Virginia Beach wrote. If you're a history buff, it'll tell you that whole story beautifully. But that's kind of the gist of why the DuPonts came down here. They were part of that same industrialist surge that came in around, basically between the turn of the century and the 1940s is when they were primarily coming here. The question on Spring Island, we worked with Spring Island for many years. They have the Spring Island Trust. They do conservation education work. We have overlap in our missions. We have slightly different places that we can offer. So we host some things at NEMOURS and some things at Spring Island. It's been a long-standing relationship, and I think it's gotten a lot stronger in the last several years. We're working actually quite closely with Andy and Andy Jones, if you know Andy, and Tony and Sloan and everybody there.
So my question is, and I'll try to speak loud enough. Thank you for coming out and making this presentation. You really drew together so many streams, and I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And by the way, I've already signed up for the email.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bridges, so much. Great lecture.